Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. So we will be starting now with the webinar. Just give me a sec, I'll just play the slide. So you can see my screen now. My name is Sonia and I'm from Empower School of Health. I'm into the student acquisition team within Power. And as you can see, the topic for today's webinar is pharmaceutical waste management. And for today's webinar, the speaker is Professor Andy. He is the Director and Training Capacity Building of Empower School of Health. And Ms. Vayani, she is Rector, Ghana College of Pharmacists. Now, as I have mentioned, that today's moderator for today's webinar is Ms. Vayani. So I would request Ms. Vayani, please briefly introduce yourself, and also for all of the participants and attendees for today's webinar. The recording, slide deck, and certificate link will be provided to all. The link will be posted at the end of the webinar after poll 2, and the recording slide deck will be shared with you all post webinar within 24 to 48 hours. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Vayani. Vayani, you are on mute. I would request you to please unmute.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Sonia, for leading this part of the program. And thank you to all of you for joining. My name, as has been mentioned, is Yvonne Yenjua Iseku, and I'm Rector of the Ghana College of Pharmacists. And so I'll speak just a little bit about the college, a few things about the college, and also about what we hope to get from this webinar. And then I will introduce our speaker for the day. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, so just to encourage everybody to keep your microphone and your video off. And there are questions. There's an opportunity, there'll be the opportunity to have a question and answer session. You can raise your hand when that time comes, or you can put your question in the chat if it comes up as we are going through the session and you cannot wait. And we will also be taking a poll available, as well as the slides that will be used. And when we take the poll, please participate so that we can engage better, all of us. Thank you. Next slide. Right, so for the speakers, we'll keep our cameras on. Next slide, please. Right, so we will take this poll and we'll encourage all of you to participate. Just a few questions, just to get to know you better, and also to understand how this collaborative arrangement between the Ghana College of Pharmacists and Empower School of Health can help you moving forward with respect to supply chain, with respect to any aspect of pharmaceutical product or health commodities, how to handle them, how to manage them, how to deal with them. And so just in the next minute or so, if you can quickly, thank you so much. We have quite a few answers already. So yes, keep your answers coming. We want to get to know you better. Just 6 questions. So it shouldn't take too long for you to finish. If you are just joining, as I can see, a number of us are joining, please join the poll. I'm sure you can already see the poll on your screens. So join the poll, take the poll, and let's hear from you. We have just about 50% of our participants who are online joining. So maybe when we get just over 55, usually a pass mark, a good grade is higher than that. So it would be great if the majority of us could join, answer just 6 questions, and then we will go on. Yes. So please, just 6 questions. Great. I think we can end the poll now. We have about a little over 60% of the participants who are currently online having participated. And so thank you very much. Thank you so much. Yes. Perhaps when we have finished, we will try and see if whatever information that we gathered, which will be beneficial for us to share. Thank you so much for participating. Can we have the next slide, please? Right. So we are looking at pharmaceutical waste management. My name is Yvonne Yerichua-Isiku. I'm rector of the Ghana College of Pharmacists. And I will share just a few slides and then I'll hand over to Professor Andy Baraklow. So the Ghana College of Pharmacists exists to develop and impart needed competencies through education and training for the delivery of improved pharmaceutical practice and to support effective national health policy formulation. And our vision is to be a college of choice for the training of world-class practitioners in specialized pharmacy services for quality healthcare delivery. Next slide. The mandate of the Ghana College of Pharmacists is found in section 84 to section 113 of Act 833, which was passed in 2011. And it is to promote specialist training in pharmacy and related disciplines. So anything related to the delivery of pharmacy services, the supply of pharmacy products, anything related. To promote continuous professional development in pharmacy and related disciplines, to promote research in pharmaceutical practice and related disciplines, and to contribute to the formulation of policies and on sound health medicines and activities, including our publication of our GCP journal, which is available for you to access whenever you need to. It is an opportunity also for you to share your findings in pharmaceutical delivery in whatever area. Just share your findings with the world at large. Our next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. So at the Ghana College of Pharmacists, we go through specializations. We have short courses. We have CPDs. We have collaborative training programs like this one, where we're very knowledgeable. We got the video at the beginning, and we'll get a little more information about Empower in supply chain. And so at Ghana College of Pharmacists, we see that it's important for us to collaborate, to have some of the training sessions, which we have also been introduced to in the earlier videos, which will empower us and give us the knowledge that we need to provide the pharmaceutical services that we need. Next slide, please. So pharmaceutical waste management is crucial for the effective management of the whole pharmaceutical supply value chain. And it is important for the waste properly, and it gets into our water and our food supply systems, then we will be threatened in that the water and the food will not be wholesome. So it is important for the security of these resources. It is also critical to reduce the possibility of inadvertent consumption of pharmaceuticals, which can have various effects, including some which will be increased incidences of side effects, which research has shown could result in longer durations of stay in the hospital and also longer incidences of conditions. So pharmaceutical waste management is very important, particularly for all of us who are interested in ensuring the health of the population. Next slide, please. The next slide. All right. And so today we will be discussing how we can handle these pharmaceutical waste, why we should be involved at all, and the ways in which we can contribute to ensure that we are doing our part. And to lead that discussion for us is Professor Andy Baraclough. He is a professor of public health, and he's also a Director of Capacity Development at Empower School of Health. He has co-authored very important resources which are beneficial for all of us, like the Yellow Book, Managing Drug Supplies by MSH and WHO, and the e-book on health systems in action. He has extensive experience, and the part that I would like to focus on today is in effective management of pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and medical commodities, and especially the implementation of programs for the introduction of new medicines and rapid diagnostics. So we have heard from, in our collaborations with Empower School of Health, we have heard from Professor Andy Baraclough, and that, Professor, I will hand over to you. Please take over.
Okay, many thanks for the introduction from Yvonne. Thank you very much for setting the scene for us there. I see we've got people from all around the world in our webinar today, so I'll try and bring a little international flavor as well as the Ghana focus. Can we go to the next slide, please? So pharmaceutical waste management today is only an introduction. The basic course in pharmaceutical waste management is 140 contact hours. That's the basic course. The full course is around 2 years. However, today I want to stress the role of management rather than the technical, because if we don't have the management, nothing else can ever work. Next slide, please. Key point is I'm going to talk about pharmaceutical waste management. I will not absolutely, completely, 1000% not be talking about clinical waste. Every session I get about 50 questions on clinical waste. No, today is pharmaceutical waste. Any questions on clinical waste? And I have arranged for the internet to send you 10,000 volts down the line to your keyboard and mouse. Okay. It is pharmaceutical waste management today, because that is a big enough challenge for us already without going outside into clinical waste. So we must focus completely on pharmaceutical waste. Next slide, please. Well, what's pharmaceutical waste? The first question I'm going to ask you, and it might seem a bit strange to ask all these pharmacists, what is a pharmaceutical? And if we look at the World Health Organization definition, we find it's any substance for human or veterinary use. Now that's key. That's the key word that I want to focus on, because that gives us the complete understanding. For human use. We must focus on that, and I'm going to explain why. Next slide, please. If a pharmaceutical is no longer fit for human consumption, perhaps because it's expired or it's been damaged or we suspect it's substandard, then it's no longer for human use or veterinary use. So it's no longer a pharmaceutical under the legal definition. You may consider it a pharmaceutical, it's the same tablet, it's the same capsule, but under the legal definition, it is no longer a pharmaceutical. It is now a toxic chemical. It's now no longer subject to just pharmaceutical regulation. It's subject to legal environmental regulation. And that's a major problem, because not many pharmacists know about environmental laws and regulations. The minute it's not fit for human consumption, it transitions away from being a pharmaceutical and becomes a toxic chemical. Next slide, please. That transition is important because it's now subject to all the environmental laws. And Ghana, like many other countries, has got whole books of environmental laws and regulations which state how chemicals have to be handled. And your pharmaceutical is now a hazardous chemical. That's the key point to understand from the beginning. When we talk about pharmaceutical waste, recognize pharmaceutical waste it is, but it is no longer a pharmaceutical product. It's now a chemical under law. Next slide, please. And there are many environmental laws, which again, most pharmacists don't know about. No person may discharge or cause to discharge into the environment. Any person that does discharge is liable for that discharge. That's what the law says. And the next slide, please. And there's more, duty of care. No person may collect, transport, sort, recover, store, dispose, or manage waste that causes adverse effects. You are now legally responsible in law for that waste. Any person who does all of that is now subject to the law. The owner, but it goes beyond the owner or occupier of the premises. So if you're in a pharmacy or a warehouse, you don't have to be the owner, but if you're there, you're the occupier, you are now responsible for the hazardous waste. That's what the law says. And that's an important point to take on board. You are legally responsible. Next slide, please. And some countries already have detailed regulations. Ghana has got regulations in its national medicine policy and in detailed regulations from regulation boards as well on how pharmaceutical products and wastes are to be handled. But there are detailed regulations, and regrettably, few pharmacists know about them. It's a case of becoming aware of the regulations, becoming aware of the legal requirements for the management of waste. And the next slide, please. But in addition to national regulations, there are international regulations. And the most famous of this is the Basel Convention, sometimes called the Basel Convention. Now, there's no mention in the Basel Convention about pharmaceuticals, but under the World Health Organization definition, going all the way back to 1999, expired or spoiled pharmaceuticals are considered as hazardous waste for the purposes of the Basel Convention. Although the convention itself doesn't mention pharmaceuticals, it's got pages on hazardous waste, and WHO has classed all expired or spoiled pharmaceuticals as hazardous waste, so they are subject to the Basel Convention. Next slide, please. And there are details on acceptance of the Basel Convention across multiple agencies, These guidelines, a whole bunch of agencies here, the faith-based organizations, NGOs, the donor bodies have all accepted that spoiled pharmaceuticals are hazardous waste under the Basel Convention. Next slide, please. Okay. And also specifically for Africa, for sub-Saharan Africa, countries en bloc have decided to accept the classification under the Basel Convention. And there are different classifications as pharmaceutical products, but basically all expired or spoiled pharmaceuticals, or for any other reason, are classified as hazardous waste under the Basel Convention. Next slide, please. Well, this Basel Convention is important because it says that you cannot export your medicines. Any pharmaceutical waste cannot cross a boundary, cannot cross a frontier. Just think for a moment, suppose you had a delivery of antiretroviral medicine which was found to be contaminated. The manufacturer says, okay, return it to us and we'll replace it. You can't do that under the Basel Convention. If it's contaminated, it's not fit for human use. It's no longer a pharmaceutical. It's now hazardous waste. And under the Basel Convention, you cannot send it outside the country. Fundamental point of the Basel Convention is you made the waste, you have to clean it up. You cannot return to manufacturer if the manufacturer is overseas. You cannot cross a frontier with your waste. No transboundary movements permitted. There are many other regulations in the Basel Convention about incinerators, about destruction of product, but that's a key one. No transboundary movement, particularly important for low-income countries where many of the medicines are imported. It means I can't send it back to the manufacturer. Next slide, please. Well, that's all very good, Prof, but this Basel Convention, it's got nothing to do with us pharmacists. Well, actually, it has, because many countries have signed it. And Ghana signed it 20 years ago. 28th of August is its birthday, 20 years in force in Ghana. And I'm willing to bet that 90% of pharmacists this webinar today have never heard about it. That's the international agreement that's been signed by so many countries that you're going to observe these regulations. That's in addition to the national regulations. There are international regulations that determine how to handle waste. Next slide, please. Well, just a minute. If it's no longer a pharmaceutical, why are pharmacists still in charge of it? Oh, it's up to the Environmental Protection Agency now. We should give it all to them and they do it all. Unfortunately not. Just like the National Medicines Regulatory Agency, they don't actually handle the medicines, they set the regulations. The Environmental Protection Agency doesn't handle the waste, it sets the regulations. And under the environmental law, it says you own it or you occupy the premises where it is, you are legally responsible in law. Of course, it requires more than just pharmacists to handle pharmaceutical waste. It requires a team effort, a management team. Well, if that's the case, again, why do we need pharmacists? That's up to the hospital administration to do it. We need pharmacists because only pharmacists understand pharmaceutical products. And I'm going to explain more about that. So on to the next slide, please. The majority of medicines are not a single pure substance. If I look at a tablet or a capsule, I'll find there is often just a tiny amount of active pharmaceutical ingredient. And then there's excipients, there's coatings, there's waxes, there is enteric material to slow down rates of absorption. All of that is present in the capsule or the tablet. In fact, often the API is just a tiny little bit. Let me ask you, what's the average weight of an antibiotic capsule? Yeah, we go back one, please. Yep, we stay there. Yep. It's around 5 grams. But if I've got 250 milligrams of tetracycline, what's all the other? Well, that's exactly the point I'm making. All the other is all the other ingredients. So chemists only know about the API. Pharmacists hopefully know the contents of tablets and capsules and what is there, and so how to handle it effectively. Let me give you a little example, which is influenza vaccine. You may have some surplus stock of influenza vaccine. It arrived late. It was after the flu season. It didn't get used. It's now date expired. Okay, so it might be biologically active. They're usually not, but just to be sure, I'll autoclave it. And that'll be it. Then I can just dump it. It's safe. It's perfectly sterile. Well, no, because some influenza vaccine contains Thimerosal, which is a mercury compound. Under the hazardous waste regulations, I'm not allowed to dump anything with mercury in it. I have to undertake a proper waste disposal procedure called D009, appropriate for disposal of heavy metals like mercury. Only a pharmacist is likely to know what's in the vaccine. Few other people will. They know it's influenza vaccine, but they don't know all the components that go into the influenza vaccine. That's why it's critical that we have pharmacists involved in managing pharmaceutical waste, because they have the expert knowledge that is needed to handle these types of materials. Next slide, please. Well, pharmaceutical waste comes from many different streams. Under the World Health definition, it concludes expired, unused, spilt, contaminated drugs, vaccines, sera. Also, anything used to handle them, such as bottles, boxes, residues, gloves, masks, connecting tubes, and drug vials. So that's the WHO definition of pharmaceutical waste, and that's what I'm taking as the definition today. That does not include operating theatre waste or surgical department waste. It's pharmaceutical waste that we're focusing on here. And I'm going to stress why that is so important in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Well, pharmaceutical waste management, there's lots of different categories. There's lots of different ways that we handle it. We talk about P and new listed waste, and it all looks very complicated, doesn't it? I know it's too small to read, but basically it looks complicated and difficult. Next slide, please. Point I'm making, it only appears complicated because so few pharmacists have ever been trained in environmental activities, and no environmental officers have ever been trained in pharmacy. So we have this problem where pharmacists now need to understand environmental impacts, environmental regulations and law in order to be able to manage pharmaceutical waste. It is not complicated. It's not that difficult. It is not expensive, but it does require commitment and management. And that's what's been missing for so many years, the management part of it. If we don't have that, then nothing else is going to work. We need that management, and that needs to come from senior pharmacists in managing pharmaceutical waste. Next slide, please. So waste management's not impossible. It's well documented. There are really good guidelines available. It requires a little bit of technical knowledge, a little bit of funding. Generally, waste management costs less than 1% of the buy price of medicines. 1%. That's all that's needed, but often we don't even receive that. And that's because there's no management and we've not been advocating for the necessary funding. Successful management requires a total management process. You can't just do a little bit. You have to manage the whole process of waste activities, not one little bit of it, all of it. It does require good methodologies in hard reality and economic financial sense. And the next 10 slides, I'm going to really stress those points, because again, that's what's been missing for so long. Next slide, please. The first problem we have is what we call the WODA, which is the write-off disposal authorization. If I've got public stock, government stock, the first problem is I have to get it off the inventory, what we call the write-off, the WO. And that's a real problem, because often the procedures are exceedingly bureaucratic. In one country, it took 32 signatures to get a government stock write-off. Many countries have whole warehouses, whole sections of warehouses full of expired medicines, because they can't write them off. And the first difficulty is that we need vastly simplified procedures and systems for writing off, for taking it out of the inventory, all the damaged, spoiled, expired medicines. There are good guidelines available for what to do. It's part of the training courses on how to manage this WODA, this write-off disposal authorization. But that's one of the key points. And in waste management, they often stress the technical aspects of the waste. It's not, it's the management aspects that are needed. And this first management post is getting it out of the inventory, writing it off, because until then, we can't start the physical process of destruction, of disposal. So we have this process called WODA, write-off disposal authorization, to write it out of inventory and then to dispose of the items. We need to focus on that first step and get much better procedures for writing off government stock. Private sector generally has better procedures, but can still be onerous to get it written off. So they too need some better procedures. Next slide, please. But why has it been such a problem if it's so simple and so cheap as you're saying? Fundamentally, because there's a lack of commitment. Nobody ever wants to be in charge. Nobody wants to fund it. Nobody wants to allocate resources to waste. It's what we call a Cinderella activity. Like Cinderella, we're in the ashes and we have the ugly sisters of finance to bully us and make sure that we don't have a good time. It's low importance. Nobody ever thinks waste is important until somebody dies. And then suddenly waste becomes very important. There's not much knowledge about waste. And there is a vast amount of misinformation, false information, lies, lies, and lies about waste. I'm sorry to say, but there's a massive amount of fake information around waste. And we have to cut through that down to the evidence. Next slide, please. So my message here is to get real, to be fact-based, to use a risk management approach. What is the risk of this to the environment? Measure the risk, categorize the risk, and handle products by their risk. What's the risk of putting aspirin in the environment? Very little. What's the risk of putting sodium warfarin in the environment? A lot. So we need to be able to have a risk management approach. We need to understand specific regulations for pharmaceuticals, because often they're not well developed and people take the regulations from industry for chemical waste and try to apply it. They're not appropriate. We do need to acquire the knowledge, and we do need to debunk all these myths and utter nonsense that surround waste. And I'm going to try and do that in the next 5 or 6 slides. Next slide, please. First one is to understand the difference between low and high income countries. The vast majority of information about pharmaceutical waste comes from high income countries, the USA and Europe. The technical issues are the same, but the scale is not the same. So the way we undertake pharmaceutical waste is massively different. And we have to recognize the sheer magnitude, the sheer size of the difference in scale. So we're going to talk about total pharmaceutical expenditure, the TPE. Next slide, please. So most low-income countries are spending even less than $5 per capita on medicine. Ghana does very well. It comes close to the target. It's around $20 per capita in 2019. So the recommendation is $25 per capita. Well, that's pretty good, isn't it? The high-income countries are buying 100 times more medicine than you. You are buying $20 per capita. Europe buys around $800 per capita, and the USA about $1,200 per capita. They are buying 100 times more medicine than you. Next slide, please. So I see today we have quite a number of people from Afghanistan, so we've got a couple of policies from Afghanistan as well. One of the studies we did was to take the pharmaceutical waste from Afghanistan and compare it with the domestic waste just from Kabul city. So we took the total waste for the whole of the country, the pharmaceutical waste, and compared it with the municipal waste from Kabul city, the normal rubbish collection. It was the same. The annual waste for pharmaceuticals was the same as Kabul city produced in 2 hours. 2 hours against the annual pharmaceutical waste. It's minute. So if I were to put the pharmaceutical waste into the domestic waste, it would be diluted down to 1%. Even if I took the entire pharmaceutical national supply of Afghanistan, 100%, all the medicines they bought in the entire year, yeah, that's less than the high-income countries are wasting. They're wasting more medicine than you are buying. That's the scale that we're talking about to start to understand. Next slide, please. So the message here is that low-income countries are not buying that much medicine. They don't have that much of a waste problem. Oh, well, that's okay. Then we don't have to worry about it. We just put it in the domestic rubbish and forget it. I'm afraid not. No. Toxic is toxic. You can't be a little bit dead. If it's toxic and it's poisoning you. So we must handle waste responsibly. Point I'm making is that we must do it according to the scale, to the volume of waste that we have. It is not the same as the high-income countries. Next slide, please. Well, let me ask you, how much waste do you have? And the simple answer for most countries is they don't know. If I ask what's the stock damage rate, the wastage rate, the expiry rate, most countries don't know. In the survey of Southeast Asia countries that we did 2 years ago, only 15% of countries could tell us. What's happening with pharmaceutical waste in the private sector? Usually don't know. What are the hospital clinics actually doing with the waste now? Don't know. But we can estimate the quantity of waste that you've got quite simply, and then get some idea of the scale and how to approach it. Next slide, please. So if I take a typical country, I'm going to call it Asia land, and their per capita spend is up to the WHO recommendation of $25 per capita. They have a population of 50 million. You've got 35,000 hospital beds. The annual spend is 50 million times 25, which is $1.2 billion. If I sent 10% to waste, and I really hope you're not wasting 10% of your pharmaceuticals, but in this example, I'm going to go completely overboard and say 10% is wasted. That's $125 million. That's still less than one city in the high-income countries. So your country is wasting less than one city waste in the high income countries. And that amount would be about 240-foot trucks, or about 2,000 tons of waste per year. About 2,000 tons. Next slide, please. Everybody thinks they've got to have an incinerator. And it's true that the Basel Convention recommends destroying pharmaceutical waste in incinerators. The problem is everybody takes the data from high-income countries, and that gets it completely wrong. So if we look at this particular incinerator, C500, on this basis, it's good for 4,000 to 12,000 beds. In my example, ACL Land, I've got 35,000 beds, so I would need 3 of those machines for my country. In fact, that's not correct, because when I did my calculations, I've only got 2,000 tons. So in fact, half a machine is all I need for my country. Just use one machine half time is all I need, because the figures are based on high-income countries. And I'm not buying that much pharmaceuticals. I don't have that much waste. I get it completely wrong because I'm taking figures, I'm taking information from high-income countries. We have to look at the scale of what we've got and use appropriate techniques. Next slide, please. Now, incinerators can be useful, but too often they've been abandoned, unused. South Africa is littered. The biggest one is at Bloemfontein, with incinerators that are completely abandoned because it's far too big for the volume of waste that's there. They've been based on high-income country requirements, not on fact, not on the evidence in the country where they are to operate. Next slide, please. What does incineration cost? Typically, it will cost less than 1%. So it's affordable in that sense. The example of ACL Land was 2,000 tons. That would cost about 0.5% if I were to use an incineration technique. But how would I get all my waste to one place in the country? I'd have to ship waste all around the country. Do I want to pay to ship waste all around the country to my one machine, probably in the capital, to do that? Doesn't make any sense. I need a different approach for low-income countries. We have to get this fixation with incineration out. We need an approach that's suitable to the scale we're operating on. Next slide, please. The other point is that I shouldn't be doing just pharmaceutical waste. I should be doing all clinical waste, and then the incinerator would be useful. Well, in an ideal world, perhaps. I know of no country where it's worked. The minute you allow clinical waste into your pharmaceutical waste program, it will collapse. It will stop because it will be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of clinical waste. It's never worked. I've worked in 42 countries. It's never worked in any of them. You must be rigid and keep to pharmaceutical waste. Next slide, please. If I look, pharmaceutical waste is always less than 10% of the total waste from a hospital. Often it's less than 5%. If I'm going to do clinical waste, I'm going to have 10 times more volume. It's outside my scope. As pharmacists, you don't have the technical knowledge to handle all the other products. Pharmaceuticals, yes. So we must keep focused on pharmaceuticals and not try to encompass total clinical waste. It will overwhelm you. Next slide, please. So WHO says that pharmaceutical waste is only 3% of healthcare activities. Same point again, it will overwhelm you if you try to do all clinical waste. Keep to just pharmaceutical waste. Next slide, please. Now, there is a type of incinerator called the de Montfort. De Montfort is a design. The incinerator you build yourself. The De Montfort University in Leicester in the UK has invented a design for low-income countries. You buy the fire bricks, the furnace bricks, you build it yourself. It costs about $1,000. It meets the criteria of the convention that you get the temperature of 800 centigrade for at least 1 second, called the residual time. So it destroys all the compounds in it. You can use any fuel. You can use petrol, diesel, coal, gas, electric. You can even use the waste packing material, the boxes that the medicine come in to fuel it, and it will give you this requirement. So that's wonderful, isn't it? That's great. If we had that and it's small at a hospital, I could take care of all my pharmaceutical waste, couldn't I? Well, actually, no. Next slide, please. If we look at the experience, Kenya had 44. More than half of them are not working. India also had them. They're not working. Why are they not working? Because there's no management. No one's in charge. There's no budget. There's no operation. If we don't get the management, no technology is going to solve the problem. We need fundamentally the management of the process. Just buying a piece of equipment will not solve the problem. Often incineration is not the most appropriate approach for waste disposal, but we have this addiction. Somehow we must have the incinerator. That's why I come back to an evidence and fact-based approach. What's appropriate for your country? Next slide, please. So clinical waste will overwhelm you if you allow it. Keep it out. Strong statement, but the only way to manage your pharmaceutical waste is to keep strictly to pharmaceutical waste. If you go beyond that, you'll be overwhelmed by the volumes. Next slide, please. If you're going to take clinical waste, you're going to need 10 times the funding, and I don't know anywhere where it's happened. Next slide, please. How can you find out more about pharmaceutical waste? There are excellent documents and guidelines available from WHO. Power School of Health has developed an online training course of about 3 months. Link is on the screen to find out more about that. How you can look into pharmaceutical waste management in detail. Next slide, please. Okay. So my main point is, get rid of the misconception and myths. Keep to evidence-based fact. Look at the scale in your country. It requires a total systems management and a risk management approach. Fundamentally, it is a management issue, not a technical issue. Can be complex, but it's not difficult. It's not high cost, and it can be done simply and effectively. All it needs is a little knowledge and senior management commitment. I see I'm right on time at 20, so I will stop now and pass over to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Prof, for your presentation. I'll be just briefly informing all the attendees about the courses that we actually offer, so they can have a look. In between, I would request you to please look at the chat. I can see there are many questions, those are being posted, and you can pick those are the more relevant ones. This slide, you can see the list of courses that Empower offers. So we have master course. This is 24-month course and 12-month course. 24-month course is for all the people who are interested for the course, and 12-month course are for those who have already completed the PGT course from us, and they are eligible for 12-month master's course. For more details, I would request you all to please visit our website. In addition, I can see there are many questions that about the slide deck. So please be assured the slide decks will be shared with all within 24 to 48 hours. Also, the certificate link will be posted on the chat box at the end of after Q&A. So you can just fill up your form and you can download your certificate. So as mentioned in the last slide, the master's 24-month course, you can see the fee over here. 8,000 USD. For 12 months, it's 5,500 USD, and 12-month PGD course, this is 2,500 USD. So this is the initial fee. We have partial scholarship and we have reduced fee for group enrollments. For more details, I would request you to please visit the website and you can get connected with us. And as you can see on the slide, these courses are approved by UNITA. The list of courses, we also have diploma courses, that is PGD course, that is in English and French. And these are the list of the certificate courses that we offer. So the link will be posted on the chat box. For the scholarship option, partial scholarship option and the group discounts, you can get connected with us on operations at Power School of Health. Thank you all. Now this is time for poll 2, and I will hand over this floor to Vioni, so she can just introduce the poll 2 and launch the results also. And then we will move forward for the Q&A session. Thank you all.
Thank you. So please let's answer our questions. There are 4 questions for this poll. And while we take our poll, just to say that, Professor, that was quite enlightening. And I think in our earlier discussions, I mentioned the fact that this is something that is really of interest to me. And I have done some work in managing pharmaceuticals disposal in Ghana. And so very, very enlightening and very interesting discussions. And as Sonia said, there are quite a number of questions and some very interesting based on some of the comments that you've made. So yes, I think that once we get to answering the questions, perhaps more points will come up. And I think bearing in mind, discussing the thing about looking at your country and looking at your setting and seeing what is actually applicable, rather than taking information from some other place, bearing in mind the fact that the evidence shows that for us in lower to middle income countries, our consumption of pharmaceuticals is important, that we, I suppose, think outside the box and come up with ideas that will best fit our purpose. Yes, so let's look again at our poll. If you haven't taken the poll yet, please go ahead and take the poll. And let me also add that for more information on some of the courses of the Ghana College of Pharmacists, because we are working in collaboration with Empower School of Health, and some of the courses that may be of interest to all of us who are on this call are available, and you will have information on how you can access those courses and how you can benefit from all of those courses. So we'll wait a bit to get a higher response from our poll. Just 4 questions, please. Let's join quickly. But the results are showing very positive, so that's great. 58, let's get to 60%, and then we will stop and go on to our question and answer session. Right. So now we have 60% of participants responding, and so I think we can end the poll. And Sonia, are you going to take over the question and answer session?
No, Vioni, you just take it further.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Professor Baraklo, a few questions on, and I think the first set of questions came up with respect to your comments on being able to transfer or export your pharmaceuticals if there are problems with it. Now, one of our participants wants to find out what would you do? What is the response, bearing in mind the Basel Treaty? If the damage to the pharmaceutical occurred in transit, so you are importing the product, and the damage occurred in transit to your country, how should that be managed? And also with respect to bearing in mind perhaps the distance that it will take or the time it will take for you to receive some products, is there in Incoterm, the Incoterm understandings or the principles in Incoterms, is there anything about cost? Is there even an issue of the shelf life? What should be the shelf life before some pharmaceuticals are imported, whether it is for donation or for commercial purposes? And is there anything on cost when it is, for instance, if you export, if somebody else exports, for instance, into Ghana and there is a problem with it, will there be a cost with respect to handling these products? So maybe let's start with these, or maybe I should just add one more on where do expired medicines go? And if you can just take those for us. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, let's start with delivery. It's an Incoterm, and if it's crossed into the country, not physically, if it's come through customs, it's released into the country. Yeah, now it's your problem. If you reject it while it's still in the customs or it's on the ship, then you can return it because it's not entered your sovereignty. Technically, it has not crossed a frontier. So the minute it clears customs, it becomes your problem. So that's the Incoterm element of it. Even if it was damaged, if you didn't notice the damage, if it cleared customs, it's now your problem. You cannot export it. Where do expired drugs go? Usually to the dump. They need to waste disposal. It depends what the product is, but it's physical destruction. There are many ways we can physically dispose of a product. And people tend to focus on the technical and the toxic. But we have to make sure the product is put beyond use as well. So if we have expired aspirin, it's not much threat to the environment. We wouldn't need a lot of chemical treatment, but we can't just dump it because people might try to reuse it. So we have to destroy it or denature it in a way that prevents its reuse. So the point about expired medicines is disposal. It has to go to a disposal procedure. We have many different disposal procedures. Some of them are country specific. So some countries have lots of motor garages that have waste oil from changing the oil in the engine. So all we do is we put the medicines in a big oil drum and we pour oil on them. And they come all oily and nasty, and it goes to the oil dump, and it goes to the domestic dump, can't be reused. If the medicine is toxic, then we have to have a different procedure called encapsulation or inertization. We stop it reacting. And some countries, they have a lot of coffee, and they have coffee grounds. And we mix it with the coffee grounds because coffee inerts it. And we then set it into concrete. So we take an oil drum, we put some concrete, liquid concrete in, we put the drugs in, and we pour liquid concrete in the top. If you have a huge amount, we take a concrete mixer truck, a 10-ton concrete mixer, the trucks that go round in a circle on the back of the truck, and we throw all the medicines in the back and it churns it all up, and we pour it out at the municipal dump and it's set in concrete. No one can ever reuse it. It's inert. It's never going to leach out for at least 100 years, by which time it's degraded and of no problem. So we have lots of low-cost, easy, simple solutions to handle them. It depends on the specific country, what we use, how we go about it. And we have solutions for pharmacy shops, retail shops, with medicines as well. They're not all big, huge operations with incinerators. They can be small, simple ones, again, using coffee grounds or cement or waste oil. Sometimes we use different types of straw that are available. It depends on the particular country what's used. You asked me about the cost. We encourage all countries to demand the cost. So in Afghanistan, we got it written into the policy, all donors must provide 1% cash with their donation to manage waste disposal. You asked about expiry. The WHO recommendation is no medicine should arrive in country with less than 75% of its shelf life. If it does, you have grounds for rejecting it. Unless you particularly issue a waiver, the standing condition is at least 75%. That's a WHO regulation, and it's in the WHO transfer of pharmaceutical ownership forms as well. So 75% on arrival, or you don't accept it unless it's an urgent particular case and you grant a waiver. Highly exceptional. So I think that's all. The cost, again, I encourage all countries to put it into their policy. All donated drugs come with 1% for waste management. Yeah, and donors have paid up in the past, and we encourage it often. And I often encourage donors as well. They don't like to see me coming down the corridor because they know I'm going to hit them for money. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. And somebody is talking about the practical impacts of reverse supply chain. So, but I suppose you have talked about it in terms of the fact that you can't really send it back. But what would be the cost? Is it possible to quantify that? And then someone is asking, how can we manage waste related to pharmaceutical primary packages? Yeah. Especially PVC and like blisters and that kind of thing. So if you can take that for us while we compile the rest.
Okay. There's an increasing trend in the high-income countries to force manufacturers to accept return product. So it could be product that is expired or product that's been unsold. So this is increasing trend for pharmaceutical vigilance, as it's being called, eco-vigilance, that manufacturers are responsible for their product. Yeah. And if it's not used, it's returned to them. Under the Basel Convention for exported products, that's not really possible. You can't do that. But there is a trend towards that happening. Reverse logistics, some donors are demanding it. I'm sure many of you had to handle COVID vaccine. It was a condition of the COVID vaccine supply that you had to send all the empty vials back. I think that's absolute nonsense that you're spending money to truck empty vials all around the world, but that was a condition of the supply. It shouldn't be necessary. We can dispose of them quite easily on site where they're being used. We shouldn't be paying to truck waste around. Because our volume of waste is not that much. Yeah. Even if I took the whole waste from the hospital and put it in the river, it would probably make the river a little bit cleaner. I mean, that's the reality of the volumes we're dealing with. And we have all this nonsense about massive environmental impact. We don't have a massive environmental impact yet because we're using so much less medicine. We do have to take care of the toxic material. We do have to manage that properly. But that's relatively small volumes, straightforward and simply done. So, PVC. There is equipment that strips out the blisters and recycles the PVC. It shreds it and it can go to be remelted. That only works in huge population countries like India. Yeah. When you've got a population of 1 billion people, or in China, where more than 1 billion people, then you can use equipment like that to shred. Normally you cannot. We concentrate on denaturing it, and the simple way to denature PVC is engine oil. it works very well because it degrades the PVC.
Thank you, Professor. Maybe just to add that in Ghana, even when you look at for community pharmacy practice, the Ghana FDA supports community pharmacists or community pharmacies in dealing with their pharmaceutical waste, in that they will receive expired medicines and deal with them the way so they categorize them and handle them the way they normally would do with other products from the maybe big suppliers like importers and that kind of thing, and they will add it. And it's also possible to do some kind of write-off with respect to the medicines. Once they are received properly from the FDA, the pharmaceutical company can get a certificate that this quantity has been received, and so go through the processes of getting some write-off. So yes, like you have said, some work is being done. It doesn't cover everybody, and maybe the focus on, for instance, looking at some of these low-cost solutions that you have mentioned is something that maybe not as small a scale as a community pharmacy, but perhaps maybe in a district, and bring all of those together because the quantities are so small at any particular time. So somebody wants to find out. I believe that is one of the questions you didn't want asked, but then it's come up anyway. Since you are thinking we shouldn't add, you are proposing that we shouldn't at all consider adding hospital waste or other forms of hospital waste to our pharmaceutical waste. A hospital manager, for instance, a pharmacist who is a hospital manager who is very interested in handling pharmaceutical waste and is listening to you now, wants to know how should we do it? Do you suggest we have 2 separate incinerators or something like that?
Frankly, yes, because I don't believe the clinical waste will ever pay, will ever maintain, and will ever manage. The clinical waste has exactly the same problem as the pharmaceutical waste, but it has 10 times more waste.
Yeah. Okay.
So they need 10 times more budget. And they need management of that scale. They need a team. And no doctor ever wants to do waste management. No surgeon especially ever wants to do waste management and spend his time supervising an incinerator or a municipal dump. Nobody ever wants that. And that's the problem. Yeah. The reason why I say we must keep is just because it overwhelms everything. And I've not seen the commitment, even during COVID, when we had all the extra gowns, all the extra masks. I didn't see any commitment. I didn't see any budget increase for waste management. What did we do with them? Put them in plastic bags and dump them. You know?
Yeah.
There was nothing happened. Even with all the extra funding for COVID, no attention to the waste. And that's why I say we have to keep pharmaceutical waste separate so that we can be sure that we're doing our piece. We're managing our section reasonably well. I think Sonia's about to call time on us. Yeah,
yeah, I think so. Sonia, do we have time for one more, just to push one more question through? Is that possible?
Yeah, yes, we can. I think we should just wrap up in like 5 minutes. We are already above the time. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So somebody had a question on community pharmacies, but I think maybe if you can comment on that, on the small ways, the small methods. But somebody wants to find out a cheap incineration method, for a low scale, low budget incineration method for use in a clinic or maybe in some facility that still wants to use incineration to take care of their but yes, a low cost incineration method, if you can help with that.
So
yes.
The point about incineration, it's not just a fire.
Yes.
You have to reach a minimum of 800 degrees centigrade for at least 1 second.
Okay.
Now, the new Basel Convention regulations are even higher. It's 1,200 for 3 seconds. But if we keep to the old regulations of 800 for 1 second, the De Montfort design will do that. That's a low-cost incinerator. De Montfort doesn't make them. It only gives you the plans. You build it yourself. So you buy high-temperature bricks, sometimes called furnace bricks. Very easy to build. You then just run it yourself. It's low cost, it's simple to do, but it needs management. If you put a lot of glass in there, the glass will melt and block everything up. So you have to sort your items. You have to make it. You have to have fuel. You cannot just give it to a laborer and say, run the incinerator. They have no technical knowledge of what to do. It has to be managed. There has to be someone with technical knowledge in charge. That will do it. If you have the management, it will work. But just buying the incinerator will not solve the problem.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Oh, thank you very much. Just saying a very big thank you. And I am sure that, as you have mentioned, and because we'll receive the slides also, there will be some of the contacts. And I think, yes, these low-cost incinerators and the advice, the training that goes with it is something that we can acquire, get the training on how to manage these incinerators and use them in our facilities if we think that is the way to go, or if we can consider some of the other low-cost solutions that Professor Andy has proposed today. We can use that and manage our pharmaceutical waste effectively. And so, Professor, thank you so much. And I'll now hand over back to Sonia.
Thank you, Professor Andy. Thank you, Vayoni, for your support. And for those questions have not been answered, apologies, because we have already assigned time and we have other sessions also scheduled. So we will be having more webinars along with GCP on different topics. So I would request you all to please share the topics which are more relevant for you. So we will organize the next session accordingly as per your suggestion. A big thank you for Professor Andy for his presentation, and Vayoni and GCP for their support. Thank you.
Okay. Namaste and good night to all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.